been talking about, the Food Administration, which encouraged people to, do without certain items occasionally in order so our fighting troops overseas could have, like having a meatless day and a wheatless day and a sweetless day, once a week to help conserve. We talked about how Americans grew victory gardens and empty lots in their backyards to help have enough. And now, it's all that aside, it's still expensive to produce all this war material, and it's expensive to keep our troops supplied with arms and weapons and ammunition and coats and boots and everything that a soldier needs, fighting from a trench. So the problem that America faces here is pretty much twofold. First, you've got to raise money. Second, you have to convince people in America that the war is necessary and that they need to support it. So the United States spent about $35.5 billion on the war effort in World War I. $35.5 billion. The government raised about 1/3 of that through taxes, including a progressive income tax, a war profits tax, and then they increased excise taxes on things like tobacco, liquor, luxury goods. You guys ever played Monopoly? You'll ever land on the rectangle that says luxury tax? It's got a picture of a ring. That's a real thing. Luxury goods can be taxed at a higher rate. Okay, so that's 1/3 of that $35.5 billion was raised through taxes. Okay, the rest was borrowed from the people in what we refer to as like a bond. Okay, now they were called Liberty bonds or victory bonds, victory loans, and basically a citizen could purchase a Liberty bond, or a victory bond, whatever you want to call it. And so you buy this bond. That money goes directly to the government for them to use immediately. And then 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you get your money back and with interest. So it's like an investment. Why does it
say bring him home?
Bring him home with the victory loan.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like they're like saying buy him to bring him home.
The more money you spend now, the faster we can end the war.
Oh.
Yep. So the government sold bonds to tens of thousands of volunteers. Even like these newfangled celebrities called movie stars, because movies were brand new. Movie stars spoke at rallies and factories, even at schools and street corners, to try to convince people to buy these bonds, and and they would use propaganda techniques, saying things like only a friend of Germany would refuse to buy a war bond. So that's one thing. They got to raise the money. Now they have to convince people that the war is necessary, and they have to do it kind of at the same time, because people aren't going to buy these bonds if they don't really support the war effort. So to popularize the war, the government set up its very first ever propaganda agency. Who can tell me the definition of propaganda? You guys don't know what propaganda is? Advertising is a good example of propaganda. Absolutely, 100%. All advertising is propaganda. What is the definition?
Like public persuasion?
Yeah. It is biased communication designed to influence your thoughts and actions. Biased communication. So it's not, is propaganda true? It can be. It can be. Can it be false? Yeah. It can be. So truthfulness is not an indicator of propaganda. Doesn't matter, okay? Propaganda is just like trying to get you to do something through persuasive means. And it has an agenda. It's bias. Okay, does everyone understand what propaganda is now? Okay, so the first ever propaganda agency of America is called the Committee on Public Information. Kind of a harmless sounding. Committee on Public Information. And the entire purpose of this was to influence people's thoughts and actions to favor the war. The person put in charge of this was George Creel. George Creel. He's a journalist. Who better to be in charge of this than, a journalist? A yellow journalist at that. Creel persuaded, he has this job, and he persuaded thousands of our nation's artists and advertising agencies to create posters and paintings and cartoons, even sculptures promoting the war. He recruited 75,000 men to serve as he called them 4-minute men. And these people would speak about everything related to the war, particularly the draft, the rationing that people are going through, bond drives, victory gardens, and let people know this is why we are fighting. Here's why we are fighting. Here's some examples. Look at this. This is the first time we see this Uncle Sam poster during World War I. Created as a poster to... Now, what's the purpose of this propaganda? Get you to just enlist. What's the purpose of this propaganda? Destroy this mad brute. He's got a poor, innocent white woman. And he's got a bat that says culture. What's the purpose of this? To paint our enemy as a savage beast that must be defeated for the sake of humanity. Help this poor, defenseless woman. So, there's tons and tons, literally thousands of examples. Creel did not neglect written word either. He ordered about 25 million copies of a pamphlet called How the War Came to America. So it's not like we went looking for war, but how the war came to America. He had it printed in all kinds of languages, not just English, so that even immigrants could read it, because really the majority of our fighting force were immigrants, a significant portion. So he had these printed out, gave them to the Boy Scouts of America to deliver. I mean, some bright-eyed Boy Scout hands you a pamphlet, you're going to look at it. Do you think his propaganda campaign was effective? We're talking about it, aren't we? Yeah. Uncle Sam, are you kidding me? Everybody on planet Earth has seen this Uncle Sam, okay? So it was highly effective. It promotes patriotism. But also, it's going to have some unforeseen consequences. Because, you see this? Who's this? This is painting our enemy in a very negative light. Who was our enemy? Who are they painting as negative, as bad guys? Germans, okay? Are there a lot of German immigrants in America? Do you think it's going to have some implications for them? It most certainly does. So you're going to see an anti-immigration hysteria. Look at this. Look at like 5-year-old kids. To hell with the Kaiser. This is like very negative German stuff. Okay? So the main targets of this anti-immigration hysteria were obviously the Germans and people from Austria-Hungary, Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the 2 million Americans who had been born in Germany but were American. Many Americans that had German names lost their jobs. Orchestras refused to play music from Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, all German or Austrian. Towns that had German names changed the names of their towns. Schools stopped teaching German as the language. Imagine
Kindergarten?
huh?
Was there still kindergarten?
Yeah, actually there was still kindergarten, but I think they called it preschool then, even though technically it wasn't preschool. Librarians took books that were written by German authors and removed them from the shelves. We're not burning them yet. That's more of a later on thing. And then obviously people even resorted to violence against German people, flogging them, smearing them with tar and feathers. At one point, there was a mob that assembled in Illinois who wrapped a German flag around a German-born coal miner and then hung him. Yeah, and then they got in trouble, and then they were free to the jury cleared them, they were found not guilty. Yeah. So this was not that long ago, guys. This kind of hysteria.
They treat kids the same way as they treat the adults.
I mean, children are children, but if you are going home, let's say you go home every day and all you hear is your parents talk about how horrible German people are, and you meet a German person in your class, are you going to treat them well?
No.
Probably not. Americans changed, we have all kind German stuff is, permeated throughout American culture. Even diseases like German measles, they changed the name. You know what they called them during World War I? Liberty measles.
Why would they do that?
God, that's dumb, isn't it?
If they hated the Germans so much, they'd be like, ew, measles, they're German.
Yeah. Couldn't even get a hamburger anymore. No, they didn't have hamburgers like that, but hamburger meat named after Hamburg, Germany. You know what they called it during World War I?
Ground beef.
Salisbury steak. That's where Salisbury steak. Or a Liberty sandwich instead of a hamburger. Liberty sandwich. Go to McDonald's and get you a quarter-pound Liberty sandwich. Sauerkraut became Liberty cabbage. Dash hounds, Liberty pups. Yeah.
Whoa.
Or dachshund, however you say it. So, Frankfurters. What did Frankfurters become? Hot dogs. That one stuck. Nobody calls them Frankfurters anymore. Now they're hot dogs. So, all that came about as a result of the anti-German sentiment. Anti-German sentiment. And that's not a new thing. I remember after September 11th, President Bush, we're sending troops to Iraq and we're going to war, and France wouldn't support us. And so we stopped calling it, we called French fries Liberty fries, freedom fries. That was during my lifetime, guys. That was during my lifetime. So it happened during World War I against the Germans as well. Okay. A little bit more here. So these are images that are obviously from World War I and have to do with a congressional act called the Espionage and Sedition Acts. It's two separate acts of Congress. The Espionage Act was passed in 1917, and the Sedition Act, 1918. So what is espionage? What is it? Spying. What is sedition? Basically, it's not doing what you're told. Okay? It's like insubordination to the point where you are affecting the government. All right, sedition. That is what sedition is. So these are acts that are targeted at American citizens who they believe are trying to do things to undermine the government. So, if you violated either of these acts, you could be fined up to $10,000 and sentenced to up to 20 years in jail. 20 years. So what do you think is so bad here? What are people doing and saying that could warrant 20 years in prison? You would think like espionage, like spying and trying to sell out our country. But really, it was just anything disloyal, anything that you say that would be abusive about the government, or if you encouraged people to not register for the draft by peaceful protest. Like, see these people in the street? Resist the draft. Don't register. Is this against the law, what they're doing? Yeah, according to the Alien and Sedition Acts. I'm not alien. Espionage and Sedition Acts. It's against the law. What's wrong with that?
Freedom of speech.
That's right. So the Espionage and Sedition Act, very similar to like what John Adams did in 1798 with the Alien and Sedition Acts, these laws quite clearly violate the spirit of the First Amendment. Now, can you, to this day, speak out against the government and tell people to resist the draft and not show up? Can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
You can't. It would be unlawful. How come that is a form of speech that's not protected? What if nobody signed up for the draft and everybody said we're not fighting? What would happen in a wartime? Would that be bad for our country? Yeah, our national security would be in threat, in danger. So it's actually upheld that the government can do this. That you cannot, the type of speech or symbolic action that creates a clear and present danger to national security is not protected. Now, during World War I, the Espionage and Sedition Acts are targeted at a couple groups of people. One is socialists, and the other are labor leaders. Socialists and labor leaders. For an example, Eugene V. Debs. That is not a Supreme Court case. That is his name. Eugene V. Debs. That's his name. He was given a 10-year prison sentence for speaking out against the war and the draft. Emma Goldman, this lady here in the middle, she's not a socialist. She's an anarchist. She wants to see the government fall apart. She got a 2-year prison sentence and a $10,000 fine for organizing the No Conscription League to convince people to not register and show up for when they're drafted. When she got out of jail, she was deported.
To where?
Russia. Big Bill Haywood is a labor leader. He's a labor leader. And his labor union is the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. Industrial Workers of the World. He gets in trouble because he's accused of sabotaging the war effort because they urged workers to do what? Strike. Workers are on strike, stuff's not getting made. But he wants these workers to strike so they get better conditions, better pay. Hayward was sentenced to a very long prison term. But he skips out on that and goes to Russia. So, I mean, these are Americans, and they're being deported and sent away, all because they're speaking out against the war effort. Big Bill Haywood just wants to see labor get its fair shake. Okay. All right, so we'll stop there for the day.